If we're going to move into a world where we're transacting via Bitcoin and maybe other public blockchains for stable coins for the time being, people want privacy. When I pay for a coffee, I don't want people to see my bank account balance that payment came from. And that's the equivalent of what you're dealing with when you're spending in Bitcoin or on another public blockchain, because people have a right to privacy in the digital age. We're not used to that. It has not been the norm thus far in the digital age, but it's something that we do need to fight for. And again, we need to do that mindfully. We need to do that by saying that I'm just an everyday person who values my privacy, that we all have a right to privacy, that even government officials want privacy, and that we should stand our ground with that, which is part of the reason I covered the Samurai and Tornado Cash cases as closely as I did. Also knowing that there are people from the White House that follow my social media accounts.
Welcome back to Hosting Bitcoin, where we go beyond blocks and hash rate to explore the people and principles shaping the deeper layers of this movement. And today, I am thrilled to have our guest for so many reasons. Frank Corva is a Bitcoin analyst, writer, and speaker known for bridging macroeconomics, personal sovereignty, human rights, and even a dose of spiritual clarity. His work brings rare depth, tying together asset cycles, human behavior, and the unseen forces that shape both. Frank is one of those few voices who can talk about the Fed, your inner world, and Bitcoin's role in both without losing the thread. He's written for Bitcoin Magazine, Forbes, appeared on top media outlets, and built a reputation as someone who makes the complex feel connected and authentic. Today, we're diving into a wide array of topics, both economic, emotional, and even a little bit spiritual, and what it means to stay grounded while navigating them all and being a light for others to follow on their own learning journey. Frank, thank you so much for joining me on Hosting Bitcoin.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here with you.
It has been super fun getting a chance to hang out with you the last couple times when we're in DC, when we're in New York, getting to hear what you're working on. For people that are not familiar with you, which would be kind of surprising, but we do have some people who are new to the space listening to the show. What is your background, Frank, and how did you get into the Bitcoin space?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not going to go too far back. I'm going to give you a very quick sort of 20-year summary within 2 minutes or so. But um, if I go really far back about how I got into it, I was actually in the independent music scene in New York, specifically like punk, hardcore, and underground hip hop. And what I learned from that scene was very much the DIY ethos. So people like put out their own records or put on their own show. There was no permission, right? It was permissionless. So when someone described Bitcoin to me, it was in January of 2018, about 8 years ago now. And this like permissionless, non-state, non-private company thing, I was just like, whoa. And I was in that world, even professionally. I was in the music business in the independent label world and management world up until about 2006, 7. That was really sort of the end of when people were buying physical music and things were transitioning to digital, but they hadn't really done so yet. And I was watching bands sign a lot of bad contracts, but that's a whole different story. So I moved out of that world. But it did give me a framework for sort of what Bitcoin is. Like, we're not asking for permission. Anybody who wants to be a part of this thing can be a part of this thing. You could start developing on it. You could start doing, you could start building on it. And I love that element of it. Other than that, I was actually my most recent job before where I am now as a writing professor. I was teaching writing at a few different colleges in New York here. And I used to tell my students, if you want to see how well you understand something, write about it, and very quickly you'll see the gaps in your knowledge. So you'll say, "Oh yeah, I get Bitcoin, I get it," and then you go to sit down to write a newsletter once or twice a week, and all of a sudden you're like, "I got a lot of homework to do," and so that was how I got into the Bitcoin space as a I guess we'll call it like a personality or a writer. 5 years ago, started writing a Substack, which I still write basically every week. And I wrote, I said to my audience, like, this is going to be watching me learn in public, essentially. Like, I'm not a financial analyst. I'm not a technologist. I'm just utterly fascinated with this technology. And I'm going to hold myself to this standard of publishing every Sunday and Thursday, every few days, to essentially force myself when something new happens in Bitcoin to try to understand it better and to explain it to you, the reader. And so that's what I did. Within about a year of that, I got a few job offers. The first few I turned down. I think it was Real Vision and a handful of other people asked me to start writing their newsletter. I ended up working for a company called Finder, which is like the Forbes advisor of Australia. They have some New York offices as well. I was reviewing Bitcoin products, a little bit of like broader crypto, but like, crypto exchanges, not like Shilling, Solana, or something like that. And then it was about 2 years ago that Bitcoin Magazine, I got a DM. It was strange. A lot of things happened right at the same time. I got brought on as a part-time contributor at Forbes Digital Assets to write about Bitcoin adoption around the world. I had done a 5-part series for CoinDesk on the future of Bitcoin, the year ahead in Bitcoin. I think that was the beginning of 2024. And then I got a DM from Mark Goodwin, who was the editor of Bitcoin Magazine at the time, asking me to come on as their business correspondent. So I started in that role, moved over into political correspondent, most recently, specifically the White House correspondent, and I concluded in that role. But I've stayed on at Bitcoin Magazine as a contributor. But my time in that role ended. It was the end of October, I believe, October 31st.
So cool. Such a wide ranging journey and experience. As you were going through your own learning journey, what was clicking for you that kind of helped you shift your worldview? Or what kind of things came up as you were learning in public, as you say? What kind of surprised you about ways that you had previously conceived of the world? And I mean, going all the way to the White House, that's going to shift your perception of reality
Yeah.
quite a bit, being that close to decision making. um, like, what changed for you over the course of those years as you were writing about this and being more exposed to everything that was evolving in the space?
Yeah, it's a really 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 important question because I took a lot of blows. I think as does anybody who puts themselves out there. Not only puts themselves out there, but puts their ideas out there, their thoughts on something out there. The thing about Bitcoin, so I spent this so much of my time in like my late 20s and 30s trying to save money to get like a down payment on like a co-op in New York or something like that where I'm from. And I couldn't understand why I was like, why can't I save enough money? What is going on here? And I didn't know what was going on. But at one point, I had 7 jobs. I was teaching at 4 colleges. I was working for the United Nations. I was tutoring and I was waiting tables at a restaurant. So I was working like 14 hours a day, 6.5 days a week, like, one day just, or sometimes I would take a day off. And I'm like, there has to be something wrong here. Like, if I can barely get by in New York, and granted, I was working part time positions at universities that they don't really pay all that well, but still, it's a lot of time I was putting in. So I'm doing all this work, just thinking to myself, something is sort of fundamentally broken here. And I don't know what it is. I have no background in like, I'm not an anarcho capitalist or a libertarian. I wasn't studying Mises and Rothbard in high school or anything like that. And I find out about Bitcoin in January 2018, and I sort of allow it to take me down the rabbit hole. At the same time, it wasn't just Bitcoin. I was teaching at one college that allowed me to do part of my MBA or my MBA at night for free. So I was like, okay, am I just interested in money now? So I went and did some courses in finance. I was like, I hate this. I hate traditional finance. I can't stand it. Yeah. Just wasn't for me. It was just really, I did well in the classes and I understood what we were doing, but I'm like, there's nothing about this that like makes my heart sing. And with Bitcoin, finding Andreas Antonopoulos, talking about banking the unbanked. So for a little bit of other background on me, I lived in Venezuela under Chavez, I lived in a barrio there, which is like a poor neighborhood. So I've seen what deep poverty looks like. Before living in Venezuela, I lived in rural Ghana right after the financial collapse. Things were not good there at that time either. And I've also spent some time in Namibia doing work there. So this idea of like something, a network, a money that anybody in the world, at least with an internet connection, can use. It was a big question mark. I wasn't immediately an evangelist, but I was like, if this thing works, it fundamentally reshapes, I mean, really everything. And I didn't know whether that would work in my lifetime. I still don't. I hope it does. I think it will. But that was the part that was really, really exciting to me. And it wasn't until I found like the Jeff Boots of this world years later. Jeff has a quote that I love. Bitcoin is 8 billion people in service to 8 billion people. And it's this idea that Bitcoin is symbiotic, right? So we're doing something and it's a tide that's lifting all boats. I don't get that same vibe from traditional finance. It feels more extractive, the traditional system, whereas this feels more symbiotic. and I left out a period of my history there. But when I was teaching writing, I was teaching immigrants. I taught non-native English speakers. I was an ESL teacher in the public school system in New York. I used to counsel active drug users, Holocaust survivors. I've lived all over the world in some of the poorest parts of the world. So there's this idea of like, okay, I'm personally drowning financially. I can't get by. But I've also seen people all over the world drowning financially. Like, it's not that I believe there had to be a solution. I just came to see Bitcoin as that solution. Um, and there was a part of your question I'm kind of forgetting, but I think it triggered the same thought that I'm having now. That anxiety of writing and going through that process. Oh yeah, writing. What did you realize as you were learning in public? I was realizing that the world, I say this facetiously, but the world was not ready for my brilliance on Bitcoin. I had family members calling me scammers and what, you were a college professor, now you're writing about magic internet money. Like, I had no idea your brain was so broken. Like, that was the majority of the response. Yeah. And people who still, and I've learned that there's this thing, like, a lot of my family is more on the political left. Um, and there's this thing where it's like this idea that a solution could come from outside the government is really, really hard for most people to grasp, because they're like, well, what does that mean if the solution is coming from outside the government? Then you have to challenge a thought process that maybe has been ingrained in you for decades, but it's beyond the thought process. It's more than cognitive. It's an ego driven thing. It's believing that what what the solution for the world is, and this idea that this open source, permissionless protocol that's kind of governed in an anarchic fashion, the idea that this could be a solution is just too difficult for someone who has convinced themselves that solutions only come from the powers that be. And that was hard. I by nature, I used to be more of, but I am still a bit of a people pleaser, and I struggle with that, especially as a journalist. But it was hard for people to really to see people thinking less of me in real time, like really thinking less of it, like, how dare you write this stuff and make people think these things. At the same time, what I found odd was I had, like, you know single mothers come to me and say, like, hey, friends of mine who were single, like, I found your newsletter and I'm struggling financially too, like, can you teach me how to save in this thing? And I was like, yeah, happy to do that. There was a moment, it took me about 2 years, maybe three, to fully get comfortable with it. But the moment when I was fully comfortable doing what I was doing was I was recording a podcast episode with a gentleman named Lithando Nabambi, who is the community lead for Bitcoin Akazi. And he's the person in Bitcoin Akazi, which is a Bitcoin circular economy in South Africa. He's going shop to shop, onboarding the shops and teaching them about Bitcoin and this and that. But when I had him on the podcast I was doing at the time, which I'm bringing back soon, he he said something to me that was really profound, and he went into like how Bitcoin had changed his life, and it didn't only take him from the township into like a better physical living situation, but he talked about how he doesn't drink anymore. He spends more time with his child and his girlfriend. He doesn't waste money. Like, he had gone through this transformation, and Bitcoin was the catalyst for that transformation. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh, one, this thing needs to be protected, so I'm dedicating all my time to it. And then two, I want there to be 8 billion other Luthano Nabambi stories where people feel, where they've made changes in their life. They're not only more financially empowered, but they feel that the decisions they make, not drinking, not going out and wasting money, actually make a difference, versus feeling that you're in a system where, because the money itself is failing, even if you are trying to economize by saving in dollars or whatever fiat you have, you're still losing to some effect. So I just was like,
Mm.
okay, I don't care what people in my family think, or whoever thinks. Like, I'm on Luthando's side, and I remember I've told him that personally many times, and that still is what resonates with me. Like, we need to protect this. We need to make sure this works, because we could see stories like that all over the world, and that's ultimately, at the end of the day, aside from bettering my own life, that's what drives me to do what I do in this space.
Has that story of transformation also occurred in your own life? I mean, have you found yourself navigating your own world differently because this has come into your awareness?
Totally. So, one funny thing, the night I learned about Bitcoin, so it was the New Year's Eve 2017. I decided I wasn't going to drink for a year, and it was only because I was like, okay, I'm working all these jobs. I'm not gonna, even if I'm spending like, I don't even know, like, let's just say on a weekend, if you go to like a bar on a Friday and Saturday with a friend and you have like three drinks each night, you're still spending 50, $60 on those drinks. And, 50, $60 four times, over the course of a month, that's $240. It's like, that's a chunk of change at the end of the month. I'll just stop doing that. And I still believe this. The night I was at a bar for my friend's birthday. The night it was that friend whose birthday it was who described what Bitcoin was to me. I still believe if I were drinking that night, I probably would have just like pushed him away and been like, "You go have fun with your magic internet money," and blah blah blah. And I haven't had a drink since, so I stopped drinking. So I had sort of made a decision for a year. Then I was like, no, no, no. I'm gonna take all this money I would have spent on alcohol and buy Bitcoin with it, and I've still done that now, 8 years later. So that part for sure. I got back into training. I used to be a triathlete and a long distance runner. I got back into that after finding Bitcoin, wanting to take care of myself, wanting to, have a brighter future. I'm a middle aged guy and I just don't want to be, I want to be in shape. I want to be fit until I'm in my 70s or 80s. And I did not feel that way beforehand. I was far more
Mm.
nihilistic. So I've definitely had that experience of having it change me. It's also changed me in certain ways that I think are uncomfortable. I was a little bit more politically to the left. Now I'm probably more apolitical. Ironically enough, it's like says the a former White House correspondent, but it's I'm a little bit more. How do systems encourage human flourishing? That's my thoughts, and I don't think that every system, everything that the right believes encourages it. And I don't think that everything on the left either. So I'm more of a political independent at this point. I've spoken with plenty of people on the right and the left who I think are sincere about Bitcoin, and I agree with them on other issues as well. So more of, I guess, a free thinker, independent thinker, and more open to different economic theory. Obviously, I did go into studying. I'm in the middle of reading Human Action by Mises right now, and I've read The Road to Serfdom and some of the other seminal Austrian economic texts. And I wouldn't have read those things in the past. I would have had friends that said, like, why are you reading that right wing propaganda, blah, blah, blah. And I'm from New York, which is like New York City is a pretty blue, left wing sort of place. And so, yeah, it's catalyzed or it's prompted me to change a number of things in my life. The one thing I would say with that is just, to people out there maybe listening to this, I say this not as a way to dissuade you, but like, not as a means to dissuade you, but like, as you're getting into this and you want to make those changes, you have to sort of embrace a certain amount of discomfort. And that might be changing your spending habits, it might be changing your eating habits, your drinking habits, whatever it is. But ideally, once I think you fully get Bitcoin, once you fully get this idea of sovereignty and empowerment on the personal level, I think inherently other things start to shift. I just think it's a piece of the equation. And the hardest thing to do is to sort of diminish your ego to a point where you can allow those things to shift. You have to come to a point where maybe certain things you say or think aren't going to be accepted by the majority. I'm not compelling you to go out there and start running your mouth on Twitter about, purposely incendiary things. I'm just saying there's going to be things that change because you inherently start to see the world differently. And all I can tell people is please go on that journey. And I know not everybody is going to go into it to maybe the depths that I have and leave their job and like teaching at universities in New York and moving into to writing about Bitcoin, and that's fine. But I would really try to allow some space in your mind to start accepting thoughts and to start kind of like opening up your mind to things that maybe previously you weren't so willing to sort of consider or accept, because I think that's part of the evolution that Bitcoin catalyzes.
It's such an interesting journey, and you hit on a lot of things that I think are important about how people navigate this. Is many of us growing up expect that a solution to a major problem is going to come from some established power structure, and whether it's the left or the right, it's going to come from something you're familiar with. And the idea that such a profound tool for humanity could just come out of left field, released as open source software to a small list of people, really kind of breaks the frame that most people have about where change really comes from. And as you said as well, it's not a political change. It's not coming from one side or the other. It's really coming in from the back door and holding up a mirror to the ways that we have learned to navigate the world that, although they are comfortable and familiar, are not necessarily natural and definitely don't work for most of the people on earth.
Yep.
And so, especially if you've grown up embedded in that system, it does take some setting the ego aside, some massaging of your own personal beliefs to be willing to accept that there's this other way of looking at the world, that there is an entire reality that you haven't been familiar with before. And really it's quite profound how much of a 180 it is from everything that most of us have grown up with.
Yes. 100%. I couldn't agree more. I don't want to cut you off though if you were still kind of finishing your thought, but
No,
that
please.
last, yeah. I think any sort of 180 is hard, and I think change, generally speaking, is difficult. And it's not like when I'm out at a bar, still like I'm just like, oh yeah, I gave up drinking. I don't think about it anymore. When I see like friends laughing and drinking, I'm like, that looks like a blast. That's fine. But it's like I've made my decision, and at this point, it's probably a little bit superstitious. Like in the back of my mind, I'm like, if I have a drink, Bitcoin will crash or something like that. But it's not. I'm just saying that sort of jokingly. But
Too late,
the
Frank.
I think with all this stuff, change. I read a lot of Eckhart Tolle and a lot of Louise Hay. We were talking about a little bit off camera, and I read a lot of these people because I think there's like we should really become better at listening to ourselves, and when we listen to ourselves, sometimes whatever comes up. So I think I'm gonna get a little bit really kind of whatever up here for a second. I do Joe Dispenza meditations every morning. Joe Dispenza has written a number of books, but his the basic idea is that intelligence and all the ideas in the world are sort of floating around in the ether around us, and we have an ability to tap into all those things, right? To connect our brain to those things if we can diminish our ego and we could sort of allow ourselves to tap into these things. And I believe that, and whether I'm right or wrong, or Joe Dispenza's right or wrong, it's kind of irrelevant. But in doing the sort of practices and in diminishing the ego, things in my life have changed in ways that I've never experienced before. And a lot of it stemmed from me asking a question, thinking like, okay, the system seems broken. What is the way out? So, and the answer I've come to is like Bitcoin is a part of that way out. I don't think Bitcoin alone is like a magic whatever way out. Like I think the fix the money, fix the world slogan or whatever that's saying, there's some truth to it for sure. Things will get fixed for sure, but ideally it's that broader catalytic effect of saying, okay, I trusted myself enough when the rest of the world was telling me Bitcoin was a scam, and it was this. I trusted myself enough to go deeper on this thing. And then what starts to happen is like, well, what else do I need to really work on? What else do I need to listen to myself? Even sometimes when your closest, your partner, your father, your mother, your sister, your brother, whoever it is, your best friend is telling you that, nah, what are you doing over here looking at that? You don't need to, if there's something inside of you that's begging you to examine something, it's having that courage, right? Bringing you to that level of, I'm going to examine it. You might end up realizing, you know what, there was nothing there, or what I thought that thing was really wasn't what it was in the grand scheme of things. But ideally, we move into a world where, again, if Bitcoin does have a catalytic effect on you, allow it to have that effect on other aspects of your life as well. It's just, again, it's tough. And I would say the big thing with any of this stuff is consistency. Same way like dollar cost averaging is a good strategy for Bitcoin, staying close to a workout routine, not drinking for a consistent period of time, changing your diet more permanently, not just like sporadically. All of these things I think are a big role in what can be a transformation process if we stay committed to it. But I don't want to get too far off the sort of Bitcoin spectrum here, so I'll pull back there.
You're in such good company and you don't even realize it. Joe Dispenza has been absolutely transformative in both of our lives, and
Oh,
Christine Ray
awesome.
actually got a chance to work with him for a couple of years.
Oh,
And
cool.
I can tie the journey through meditation and personal development and the Bitcoin journey very closely, and they both complement each other.
Yeah.
Um, and what I personally, as a miner, love is, miners are just obsessed with energy 24/7. That's our number one thing, right?
Yep.
And the word energy, you don't really differentiate when you say it of whether you're talking about electrons or metaphysics. And so Joe says very often, nothing in your life changes until you change your energy. And
Mm,
so correlating that with sort of the path through the Bitcoin space and realizing how it truly changes energy in our electrical energy systems and our
Yep.
economic energy systems, changes the way that we interact with that energy. That was a constant, like, a through line, I guess you would say, as you work through. And I think this applies to people who have no interest in this sort of thing. Is like, you don't just buy a few sats and your life changes, right? It opens the door to you considering something and being open to another opportunity or receiving some other information in a new way.
Yep.
And these things complement each other. Openness breeds more openness, and the willingness to be uncomfortable with something new helps prepare you for that next thing that's even more profound.
Yep.
And it's just a constant unfolding. There is no bottom to it. The deeper you go, the deeper it goes, and that
Yep.
is what makes it so rewarding to launch on these paths of exploration. Have you ever felt like you've done everything right, built the business, made smart investments, and yet there's still one piece missing? If you're someone who believes in Bitcoin but hasn't yet explored mining, let me introduce you to something that most people never even realize exists, and that is fully managed Bitcoin mining with Abundant Mines. We help high net worth individuals like you own industrial grade mining infrastructure without ever touching the machines. It's hands free, professionally hosted, and designed to generate passive income by turning electricity into Bitcoin every single day. It's tax advantaged, it's asset backed, and for many of our clients, it's become one of the smartest moves that they've ever made in their investing career. So if you're ready to take the next step into real Bitcoin ownership, not just holding, but producing it at a discount, visit abundantminds.com. That's abundantminds.com, and see why this strategy is changing the game for serious investors.
Love that. Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And I think even that thought alone might be scary to people. Like, the deeper you go, the deeper it goes. I think people want a finish line. They want to say, like, wait, if I just do this, will this happen? It's a mindset shift. It's a metaphysical shift. It's a lot of things that I think need to shift. And it's funny. I was talking about Jeff Booth off camera. Jeff is, I've written in Bitcoin Magazine calling him the Eckhart Tolle of Bitcoin. He has that sort of deep wisdom about him. Natalie Brunell, in a recent interview with him, said something like, thank God you came from the future to teach us all, like, how to sort of, like, what's coming or whatever. But I've gotten to know him very, very closely. We've become friends, which is surreal to me because I have such admiration for him, and the way he thinks and the way he comports himself and how he talks and shares messages. What you're doing by doing what you said and going deeper, another way to say that is like the way he says it, which is like moving your time over to a different system. But I would say that's like converting your energy. I think the way you put it is, maybe so moving your time over feels like a cognitive, sort of very like earthly thing to do, but it's almost like converting your energy into something that feels more productive for yourself and the world around you. I think that
Mhm.
that's ultimately what's going on. And I mentioned this a little off camera, but I'll say it here too. I was actually just in Colombia with Jeff at a conference, and there was a gentleman at the beginning of the second day of this conference. It was Bitcoin Medellin, who gave a talk on the frequency of Bitcoin. So
Hmm.
frequency meaning like this level of almost like enlightenment that we exist on, and the level goes from 0 to 1,000. Down here at 0, we're talking about like guilt, shame, anger, all this non-productive emotional stuff, and then at the top, pure enlightenment that only prophets and the Buddha and everybody, heads of religions have sort of found, spiritual leaders. And he actually talked about Bitcoin as being vibrating at like a 650 to 700 frequency, which is like joy slash unconditional love. And it was a really powerful thing. And I hope he shares this talk soon. I remember sitting there thinking, like, I've watched many a Bitcoin talk, and this is one of my favorite ones I've ever seen. But it's this idea of entering a different metaphysical realm, of converting your energy, as you said. And I think one of the other reasons, and I haven't shared this publicly, is I was doing this work in the White House, and in this book, Power versus Force, which rates these energies things, he says a lot of the political sphere is like well below 200, which is really much in
Mhm.
this sort of like low frequency, low vibration thing. And I'm not trying to sound like a mystic or anything, but like you kind of feel it when you're there. You're like, this is not a place of like enlightenment. How can I
Mhm.
say it? It's not really meant to be a place of enlightenment, but at the same time, you kind of spend your time around it. You feel yourself kind of becoming it a little bit. And I was a little bit worried slash mindful of that. And, you know, moving, Jeff talks about this a lot. It's like how much time we spend in this old system, whether it's the fiat system or the current political system or engaging in whatever the new outrage is on Twitter, we're only feeding it. We're creating more and more of it versus moving our time over into a new system, doing what you did, starting a mining business, doing what Jeff does as a venture capitalist in the space, as a thought leader in the space. And this sort of gives me a little bit of a, like, I have a little bit of a WWJBD thing, like what would Jeff Booth do moment. Like, and I think about this a lot before I post things. I'm like, okay, I'm going to post this message to whatever followers I have on whatever platform. What is that doing? Am I dividing people more? Am I lowering their frequency? Am I bringing them down to a level that's going to cause them to look at the world through an us versus them lens?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying I always don't post that thing. Sometimes I feel like a distinction needs to be made and I make that distinction. But ideally, what we share, I think physics shows that we're technically not really separate. So ideally, we want to do things that are symbiotic, right? That our physical state is a bit of an illusion, and that what's really happening is much bigger than that. So ideally, we want to do things that are symbiotic, which again plays into this idea of Bitcoin being this thing that's, once you become a part of the network, you kind of rise up with it. And it's hard to do that because it doesn't always get engagement. It doesn't always feel rational when you're in the White House. I would wake up on Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, just like deeply depressed. And I'm like, how am I going to move on from this position? Like I'm in Bitcoin. I'm in the White. I remember even emailing people at the White House and I'm just being like, where are you going? Like, what are you doing after this? And actually, I have to say, like, everyone there was kind. Like, I didn't deal with any feelings of like my energy level feels like it's at zero here. They were kind for sure. I just knew in that world, no matter how kind you are or what side you're on or how good you are, you're still playing a certain game. And within that game, it's a lot. It's the old system. You're
Mm-hmm.
giving a lot of energy to a system that is incredibly broken. You're looking for like minimal gains within a system that is ruptured. It has ruptured. It's not working anymore. And I didn't want that. And what I felt like on the other side was, when I look at people like Lorraine Marcel, who started Bitcoin Dada, an educational program for African women, a Bitcoin educational program, or the people running circular economies, or the activists who are using Bitcoin to help free their people, free themselves. These are the real Bitcoin stories. Not that I'm not grateful that the Trump administration has been kinder to the Bitcoin industry. I am, and I'm happy to see that, especially after 4 years of Biden. But what was starting to sort of grate on me was this idea of like, I'm here feeding the old system,
Mm.
in a way, kind of ignoring the people in this new system who are doing the work that's largely going unrecognized, whether that's, again, someone in a circular economy or an activist. And this came to a head. I was at an HRF event and I'm in a room with a lot of these activists and people from circular economies, and I couldn't deal with the conflict anymore. I was waking up with my stomach in knots, and I was like, I know this is going to seem weird to people that I'm going to step down from this thing, but that's what I'm doing. And that's where we're at. But a lot of it comes down to, I think, at the end of the day, beyond all of these sort of like earthly static systems, I just believe there's something bigger out there, and that if we really believe in the power of Bitcoin and in ideally making a brighter future for humanity, I think it we have to really make that choice to focus our time on developing the new system versus fighting the old system.
I think that's so respectable. And honestly, I appreciate that you honored yourself to know one, what was good for you, and two, where you could actually be the most helpful. And it goes back to even this through line that we're talking about of raising your level of consciousness and interacting with consciousness on a different level. The old system, the current political system, operates at a level of consciousness, a level of energy that creates problems, challenges, conditions, and if you're following what Dispenza says, you cannot solve that problem from the same level of energy. And so, in a sense, you being in there, amazing experience. I think,
Oh, it was great.
like
It was great. Yeah.
I doubt you would trade it,
Yeah.
but important for you to recognize that that was not where you were going to make true change, at least true change aligned with the level of awareness that you are now living in. It's very challenging if you have gotten into this sort of like we're all in this together mindset to go back into spaces. I personally avoid places like DC or political places in general, like the plague, because it's really challenging. It's challenging to be in those kind of more conflict environments where that is just normal and that's accepted and that is a comfortable reality for the people that live in it. But it speaks to why it was so important that Bitcoin came from as a solution from outside the system. And I
Yes.
remember several years ago, Christine and I actually we were in Colombia, funny enough, and I told her, we're still kind of making our way through this. We weren't as deep down the rabbit hole, but I said something to her along the lines of, this is like a spiritual evolution on money. I mean, there's the mechanical, there's the technical, there's the systems, there's the incentives, there's all of this beautiful design work in this, but truly at its core, if you just step back a little bit, this is an evolution not just in monetary technology but in consciousness in a way.
Could I dive in there if you don't mind? I've said this a number of times and I agree with you 100%, but I want to quantify it a little bit differently. I want to say it in terms that maybe someone who's listening to this saying like, come on, spiritual evolution of money, what are you guys talking about? Think about it this way. So it's money that respects your time and labor. It's money that respects the fact that doesn't devalue your time and labor. That alone takes you off of the treadmill of just trying to work more out what I was on when I was working 7 jobs. When you're off the treadmill and you have a little bit of breathing room financially, now you have a little bit more, you have more time for your culture. You have more time for your family. You have more time for the things that animate you, that make the world a livable place, right? And that, so if we were to quantify what spirit is, it's more of your ability to do the things that you love and to be that version of yourself in the world. So this isn't so much, I think, a philosophical thing. If we're talking about a money that gives you your time and energy back, that's inherently spiritual. There's no question about that. Maybe I say this half jokingly, but like maybe the psychopaths or sociopaths out there who are gonna, like, now that they have more time, spend their time doing terrible things on planet Earth. Okay, I just don't think that's the maybe the exception, not the norm. I think the average person with a little bit of their time back, and also the hard part about this is like we are so conditioned by the old system. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, hustle culture, working all the time. It's taken me a minute to say like I'm right now I'm in between jobs. I'm doing a little freelance work. That's hard for me. Like it's really difficult for me to not just put in like 10 hours a day, 11 hours a day, but I'm doing it because I've been saving in Bitcoin for 8 years and I have a buffer zone, even with Bitcoin's price coming down a little bit in fiat terms. And so there's this very quantifiable thing of like, it's dignifying to have a
Mm,
money that respects your time and labor, and that inherently gives you more time to do the things that you love, to let your true self shine, to let your spirit shine. But and again, the hard part with all this though is that we do have to get out of the sort of fiat rat race 9 to 5 mentality with this. But I think what we see, and I know this is true of you, and Christine and so many people in the Bitcoin space, is there are a lot of people who put a lot of hours into what they do, but they look at this as more of a vocation than a job or a career. And I recognize myself. I've been doing a lot of writing for no one, just for my own Substack, for whatever lately, just because I'm like, I would do this whether I was paid to do it or not. It's not going to change anything at this point. And I think that those have been the first sort of signs that like something has really very much changed inside of me. There's a lot more sort of faith and like I believe what I'm doing is right. I'll figure out a way to make money doing it, and I'll move on to my next job eventually, and all that stuff. But there's a calling aspect to this for the people in the space who I think are truly doing this, not just for number go up. Not that number go up is bad either, but so there's an element of like, a lot of us spend a lot of time together at conferences and at Bitcoin events and this and that. But a lot of that stuff ends up sort of nurturing your soul in a way too, because you feel like at least you're sort of in an environment where you don't feel like the outsider for the time being. You don't feel like the weirdo or the person that nobody understands or the person at the family dinner table who like doesn't want to open their mouth about this thing that they're really passionate about. So I think that the amount of hours we put into like what we do with Bitcoin has far more to do with how much we care about it than it does for how much money we're making in the process. And especially on that note, choosing the right dimension of Bitcoin to be in. I think for you with energy, with mining, you kind of found your place, the right sort of place. For me, there was always something that went through my head when it came to doing the work in the White House. And it was, I have an aunt who was a huge hero of mine, or still is a hero of mine. She was a nun that worked in Nicaragua when the Sandinistas overthrew it in the 1970s. And it's not like she was there being like super left wing or whatever, but she built safe houses for women there. And for decades, I mean, she left. She's not a nun anymore. She became an international human rights lawyer, and she's done work like helping women who have been sexually trafficked and helping some of the poorest people on this planet. And she would always say something really, really interesting to me. I would have lunch with her, or I still do, every few months. And I would say stuff like, I have this weird feeling like I want to be more involved in like politics, or like, I don't know, something related to money. And she was just like, people in those places need love as well. And again, not trying to be too
Mhm.
frou-frou about this, but like, bring who you are to that thing, bring your integrity to that space, and ideally it will have a positive effect on that space as well. And so I think sometimes people who look at me thinking like, how could you be into like Bitcoin circular economy as an activist but also be in the White House? There's no difference to me in my mind if we're advocating for the same thing across the spectrum, which is for people to be able to use this network as freely as possible, for everyone in the world to be able to use this network as freely as possible, and we're doing that in a way that feels integral to who we are, then there's no difference the scenario that you're surrounded by. If you're bringing the correct energy to the situation, ideally you're making a positive impact on whatever level you're sort of engaging with.
So as you move into this new chapter, what sorts of stories and environments and situations are you moving towards spending more time thinking about, covering, writing about? Where are you putting your energy? Because you've already been in the Bitcoin space, but it's just migrating to a different layer.
Without a doubt. It was actually funny. Right before I got the job at Bitcoin Magazine, which I took reluctantly, I had gotten hired at Forbes to cover, like, again, Bitcoin adoption in the global South. And I was so happy. I don't get paid a ton to be a part time contributor at Forbes, but I was like, I love this idea of taking narratives that tend to exist in Bitcoin echo chambers and bringing them to a different level, like towards more of a mainstream level. And that was a little bit of what drove me to do stuff in the White House, like to talk to people. Like there was one day that I was in the press room and Carolyn Levitt introduced me, and it was like, we have Frank for Bitcoin Magazine here, and I asked her about the de minimis exemption for spending Bitcoin, and I didn't even think about this, but like I forgot that that was on like national television. I just thought it was on Bitcoin Twitter. Like I know that sounds hysterical probably, but I just didn't think, because I'm so in that world that I was like, I kind of forgot. And I would go to like family functions, and some like aunt or someone would be like, were you in the White House press room asking about, like, I was watching CNN and I saw you come on, and I'm like, oh, I forgot about that. Like everyday people saw this. But what I want to do is take stories that we know to be true, the HRF type stories and the circular economy stories. We all think those things are amazing in the Bitcoin space. But I fundamentally believe that the average person who doesn't really understand Bitcoin, the normies, if you will, also think those stories are amazing. And those will be the sorts of stories that get them to sort of be like, okay, I hear about Bitcoin in the context of like IBIT, a BlackRock ETF, or Trump talking about it. But wait, what's happening over here? And I'll say one thing that sort of testifies to the power of this. I wrote a piece on a Bitcoin circular economy called AfriBit, Kibera. So it's in the largest informal settlement in Africa. An informal settlement, another word for that is a slum. 600,000 people living in a slum within the city confines, or the city of Nairobi. And so I was at the African Bitcoin conference in December 2024, and a friend of mine who I trust a lot, a Kenyan gentleman, was like, "Please take a day to go to this place. Please just see it with your own two eyes." And I was like, "Okay." He got me a car. I went into this area. I walk around, and I lived in an equivalent sort of area in Venezuela, and this was far more dire, the situation on many levels, which I won't get into here. But it was heavy, And there's a Bitcoin circular economy there. People using Bitcoin, people who are more optimistic because of it, people who are now a part of the financial system who weren't because maybe they were a refugee. And without a national ID, if you're a refugee, you can't use M-Pesa, which is like the local mobile money system. But now, because of this circular economy and because of apps created by Kenyans like Tando, which allow you to pay from your Lightning wallet, which settles on M-Pesa, you have people getting included in the financial system. I wrote this piece for Forbes thinking like 1,000 people will read it. It'll be all Bitcoiners and whatever. And then I started seeing the stats on it. It was like 2,000 reads. Next day was 6,000 reads. Next day was 10,000. I'm like, okay, this got picked up by something. So I found out, I think one of the major Kenyan newspapers picked it up, and it got up to the BBC. And a
Hmm.
correspondent from the BBC saw the piece, went to Kibera himself, was like, what is this? Let me see it for myself. And it was, I think, the third piece the BBC has ever done on Bitcoin that was positive. They literally, at the end of the piece, they said, like, they had like an economist on to be like, but Bitcoin is volatile. It was like, okay, dude, thanks. We appreciate it. Like, it's just like, great. Like, thanks. But the rest of it was literally like a 5 minute, this is Bitcoin, banking the unbanked, serving people who have been traditionally underserved. And that's what I want to do now. What I write, I want to have that level of impact. And I speak with writers from the mainstream media. Some of them are not completely level ready to come out with some of these stories, but when I do that stuff through an outlet like Forbes, which I write primarily for now, I still contribute to Bitcoin Magazine as well, but what I'm aiming for is like all these stories that we find really beautiful as Bitcoiners. They need to get to a bigger level. And I'll one other thing about that, I ended up having a meeting with certain people. I went to an event during United Nations General Assembly Week, and I'm going to shout out Jeremy Almond from Paystand. He spoke at an event. It was a periphery event. There's a name for it. Concordia was the organization. Concordia is like a UN adjacent organization. And so he spoke at this event, and it was like basically a UN General Assembly Week event about financial inclusion. And Jeremy, he was on like a crypto and inclusion panel. He spoke directly to the power of Bitcoin circular economies and how Bitcoin is lifting people out of poverty, no government intervention, nothing, how these actual economies are making life better for people. And not only was there no resistance to him, two people from that event, Jeremy connected me with them, who are, closer to UN style stuff, who are like, we'll start listening now. We'll start paying attention now. And my message to people is like, one of the reasons I have those what would Jeff Booth do moments is because if we're just out here spouting slogans, fix the money, fix the world, and this and that, like stuff that feels a little more cultish, a little less nuanced, and we're not trying to be symbiotic, trying to say, okay, let's not attribute to malice. Let's not say that these people in government, they just want to see Bitcoin fail. Maybe they don't get it. Maybe people in the mainstream media don't get it. Maybe they haven't gone through that same transformation that we talked about. Let's not shut them out before we give them a chance to go through that transformation. Let's attempt to bring them in. Will it always work? No, it won't. I mean, some people will dig in deeper once they see, but probably that's also that's more about their own ego than it is about Bitcoin. They want to believe that they're right and that all that they've put their effort into as a writer, as a reporter about the old system and how we're going to fix it or whatever it is, like that's what they believe in. Okay, they're not ready for it yet, and that's fine. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have tried or maybe planted a seed with them. But I think also the big thing there and why the personal transformation is so important is because if we don't show up as people that feel trustworthy and that feel like Frank's a guy I want to talk to or Beau is a guy I want to talk to, if we're just super off putting and super like, Bitcoin, have fun staying poor, not going to make it, who wants to interact with someone like that? I used to say this all the time. Like, I knew that on a certain level, if I published certain things, and I say this, it's just more, it's hard to, I'm going to probably get myself in trouble by saying this, but I'll say it. But like, we know that Trump kind of like likes who he likes and doesn't like who he doesn't like. So I knew that if I was just to publish these overtly negative pieces around like Trump's meme coin or something, I probably wouldn't be invited back to the White House. Whether you like that or not, just is what it is. And so it's like, okay, did I think the meme coin hurt Bitcoin's image because people kind of associate all crypto as the same thing? I do. And it sucked. It really sucked to sort of watch that go on. I wasn't in the White House role position yet, but it was like, it was still tough to watch. Okay, so what can we do here? I can write a piece saying, this thing is a scam and blah blah blah, or I can simply say like, in a very mild mannered way. Trump coin is not Bitcoin. Still engage with the administration by saying like Bitcoin is really important. Whether they really mean it or like Bitcoin or whatever, I don't really know. But I do know one thing. I was speaking with Emily Bailey, David Bailey's wife, David, who owns David and Emily own BTC Inc., Bitcoin Magazine. And it was someone from the White House who had said, like, Frank is always super respectful when he's there. He's always grateful that we, gave him the opportunity to be there. And I would just say, bring that no matter where you go, whether it's the White House or a slum in Africa or your neighbor for dinner. you know, we don't need to ram Bitcoin down people's throats. We need to sort of be a representation of what our ideology is. If we believe that, if we, if we're a representation of the way things can change once you move your life onto a Bitcoin standard, so to speak, and we're a nasty person, then it's like, well, I'm not going to go. I don't want to be like that guy. Like, I want to be like Frank. He looks happier than he did 8 years ago. I want to be like Beau, who looks like just, I don't know, more filled with joy or more optimistic, whatever it is. We have to be that representation. And I think this is also, again, we need models like the Jeff Booths out there who show us what it looks like to just continuously build in the new system, and to not give too much of his energy to the old system, and to not constantly highlight everything that's broken or wrong with the old system. Because at the end of the day, I think even if the likes of Scott Bessent could wave a magic wand and have the U.S. not be in the debt situation it's in, they would do it. Nobody wants the U.S. to be in $38 trillion worth of debt. This is a culmination of like bad decisions upon bad decisions upon bad decisions, and bad decisions tend to proliferate more bad decisions. It doesn't mean that this is what the people in charge, whether that's people on the left or the right, that this is what they want. So if we're arguing that there's a better way, being antagonistic towards these people, fighting with them, whatever it is, like, it doesn't really move us forward. Getting to a place, like, I thought about this. I was at the event at PubKey when they opened up the new location in DC. PubKey is a Bitcoin bar for people who don't know. And Scott Bessent was there, and the Treasury Secretary of the U.S. And I'm in the back of my mind, I'm like, does this dude really need to be here? Like, look at all the fiat tomfoolery he's doing. Then I'm thinking to myself, like, I would rather have the person here and feel comfortable coming here, ideally again at some point, to answer questions, to be held accountable, not so that we could accuse him of destroying our lives or something, but I would rather the door remain open with people than shut them out and say, we're Bitcoiners doing this over here, you're not a part of this, you're the enemy. Creating that us versus them dynamic, it doesn't help. And I think that just generally speaks to, like, when you're talking about politics, again, it might not be like the high frequency dimension I want to exist in, but neither is like most of life. You know what I mean? Like, we're not there yet. You know what I mean? That's what Bitcoin conferences are for. That's what these podcasts are for, to like connect with people who we resonate with. So I think there's, sometimes we do have to go into uncomfortable and difficult situations to try to affect change. Last point on this topic, like Susie Ward, former CEO of Bitcoin Policy UK, one of my favorite human beings in this space, probably on the planet. She's like, do you think I want to talk to politicians? Do you think I want to do this? Like, we need to do it. It's just a conversation that needs to be had. Like, this isn't what makes me happiest, and it's not what makes her saddest either. It's just like, sometimes you just need to do what needs to be done. And then everybody sort of has their level of like, okay, well, that was my contribution in that space. I need to go back to a space that maybe feeds my soul more, or makes me feel a little bit more alive, a little bit more animated. And maybe that's just the way it goes. Different people take on different roles at different times, and that's totally fine.
I think this thread, the importance of this thread can't be overstated. And for people that aren't aware, Bitcoiners are 1% maybe of the population of the world. And so there's a vast majority of people we still have to talk to, educate, onboard, shepherd through something that, as we've been talking about for the whole hour, is in many ways very uncomfortable and different from anything that anybody's ever experienced in their life, and challenges a lot of very deeply held beliefs. And there's the attitude, but there's also, I mean, especially because I'm in mining, the language that alienates people if you get too technical. I mean, you start talking about hash rate and difficulty adjustment, and most people's eyes glaze over. They have no idea what you're even talking about, even if you are being cheerful, constructive, and trying to bring them on board. Since you've been doing this for several years now to a wide audience, do you have any tips for the people who want to be the lighthouse, who want to be the educator, how they can be more effective in getting people over the line in a way that supports, the greatest good for all as we're onboarding the rest of humanity to this?
Amazing question. I appreciate that. I just gave a talk on this, basically answering this question in Medellin at Bitcoin Medellin. And I would say it boils down to a few different things, but generally speaking, you have to lower your time preference as a content creator, as a writer, as a journalist, as a whatever you're doing. You can cut corners, you can do sensationalistic things, but you're then like Bo. If I start seeing you post, and I love Rizzo and Vivek and the Bitcoin Magazine handle, but if I start seeing you post all caps, rocket emoji, flames, I'm gonna be like, bro, come on, like, what are we doing here? Because it's not you, right? It's like it's not. You want to do things with integrity that feel good, so that means on a certain level lowering your time preference and building with people who feel like-minded. The term Bitcoiner, we tend to think that everybody feels the same way because they're a Bitcoiner or thinks the same way. This is not true. There are many shades of a Bitcoiner, but what you realize is like certain people you just have a heart-to-heart connection with, a brain connection, whatever it is. And you just continue to build with those people. And that might mean that you only have 10,000 followers or 1,000 followers versus 400,000 followers. But I will say this: you should build in ways that you feel proud of and where you feel like the message you really want to resonate with people is getting out there. And I've done certain things. I don't think I've ever done anything that I fully didn't believe in, but I've gone to like a point where I'm like, okay, I'm publishing this thing and like I almost feel like my voice is like it's there, but it's kind of getting lost in like whatever pressure I'm feeling, whether it's like for the organization, maybe nudging me, hey, could you cover this or whatever. Never, and no shade on Bitcoin Magazine. They never one forced me to cover anything, and they never made me cover it in a certain light. And David Bailey himself called me and told me that I had that freedom when I took on the White House position.
As a recovering people pleaser, totally resonate with that whole thought process.
Right. Yeah. So it's a piece of it. So what I would say to people is like, don't try to be something you're not in this process. And what you want to do though, you want to live in as much integrity with yourself, but at the same time, you want to learn how algorithms work and how to best get your content out there because it's not just being divisive and being flamboyant that gets people to read stuff. So think about it this way: look at Lynn Alden. Look at Jeff Booth. Does Lynn Alden post all caps, rocket emojis, nonsense, whatever? No, she posts like thoughtful things in her wheelhouse that she has she's an engineer. So I think she thinks about the financial system through an engineering perspective. She has really good macro insights and she shares those things. For me, I have this background in teaching immigrants, people who have come to New York most of the time, not because they wanted to, just because whatever situation they were dealing with in their country was so abhorrent and terrible that they had to move. They were forced to immigrate. I understand. I taught those people for 12 years. So when I write a story, and I've lived in parts of Africa, Latin America, when I write a story about what Bitcoin solves and what it doesn't solve, that is not the magic pill that fixes everything, that nuance is what I cling to. And I've had people DM me, I've had Africans say to me, I was so nervous when I would read your pieces on Africa because I just thought it was going to be another Bitcoin fixes Africa piece. He's like, and what I noticed most about your work is that you prioritize the voices of the people in your pieces. You do a lot of quoting them and like you contextualize a little bit, but you give them a lot of space for their voices to come through. And I did the same thing as a teacher. I always said to people like, look, I'm a white male from New York, grew up here. I cannot understand what your experience as like a Dominican woman is. I'm not even going to pretend. I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to try to, but I would tell people like I could see. I'm here to help you uncover your truth. We're going to do that through writing, and as I'm writing, as I'm a teacher. But I'm here to help you uncover what animates you, what makes your heart beat, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and then also to find the place where you and I connect as human beings. And when you're creating content or putting something else out there in the world, I've done a lot of things that have gotten a lot of recognition. You post a picture that you're the guy at the White House, you get a lot of recognition. And I don't feel bad posting that. It's exciting. It was great. But that stuff is like very fleeting. Like it's like, okay, that was sort of fun. Now I'm back on the train from DC to New York and okay, now what? But when I write a piece on that place in Kenya, and I get a message from the guy who runs that project saying that they're getting grants because of it and that the BBC is covering because of it. I just sob, like I just cry because it's like what in those moments, what you're doing is what Bitcoin was sort of meant to do. You're lifting people up, you're empowering them. And as a content creator, as someone putting something into the world, I'm going to back up for 1 second to tell people, to explain this to people also. The opposite of depression is not joy, it's expression. The opposite of depression is
Hmm.
not joy, it's expression. So when you're expressing something, you want that to be a piece of your essence, right? You want that to be a piece of who you are. And ideally, you're expressing this thing that then touches other people, that touches their souls, that inspires them. Now, I'm actually, you've inspired me to do this. I'm going to record the talk I did in Colombia and just put it up as a YouTube video, because I just give some practical tips on like how to get started technically as a writer, how to break your pieces up into sections, or how to make a video, all that stuff, because sometimes people need that framework as well. But generally speaking, as a content creator, don't go to become the next what Bitcoin did, if you're a podcaster, or the next the next whatever writer you really like. Be who you are. You can take cues from those writers, producers, content creators, whatever they are. Take cues, but understand that there is a place for you in this world, and that you sort of get the space to build your tribe and the people who are listening to what you're doing, and try to maybe spend some time really diving into what your principles in this space are, and what you're hoping to sort of the message you're trying to get out there. We all ideally have a thesis in the world, and the more we stick to that thesis, and the more we live with integrity with ourselves as we approach getting that thesis out there into the world, the more our content ends up looking and resonating like Jeff Booth's content, right? I did a fireside chat with Jeff in Colombia, and I was paying attention to the faces of the people in the crowd, and something came to me at the end of the talk. I've seen Jeff talk many times. I feel it's the honor of a lifetime to be the person hosting that conversation with him. And I was watching people's faces, and I said something at the end of the talk. I was like, I know you guys all feel good because of what Jeff just said. Like, we're here and we feel that we're like getting Jeff's enlightenment, his ability, this amazing combination of like empathy and intelligence. But take this moment to acknowledge that it was something inside of you already that made you want to be in this room.
Hmm.
Operate from there. When you create something, understand that this beautiful place of like vibe that Jeff has created, you brought yourself here. Like, you already sense something within Jeff. You have that within you as well. Now the goal is to figure out what your angle is, what your genius is, what you bring to the world, and you have to put that out there into the world. That obviously, like, yeah, you have to figure out how algorithms work or whatever, but not in a way where you're going to compromise your message and what you truly want to offer to the world, because it may take a little bit longer to get it out there. Like, I wrote a Substack for a year and a half before anybody cared about my writing, and I was fine with that. I there's probably things I could have done to get to have gotten more attention without even changing my message. I'm just, that's not my forte. But it was about a year and a half in that I wrote a piece that ended up getting like retweeted by Alex Gladstein and these other people who I looked up to, and I was fine with that. And I'm not saying that it'll take everybody a year and a half. For some people, maybe much quicker. For some people, maybe even longer. That's fine. But I would just say, there were certain times where I did make certain, how can I say it, where my integrity was challenged, and I remember putting those things out into the world, and just there was just, I did not feel great about it afterwards. Again, I never anything where I like lost sleep over it, and it's not easy to put stuff out continuously that you fully believe in, but it's far more satisfying. So just keep that in mind, to whatever degree you can sort of allow your thesis and your what you believe in your heart to be your north star. I think the more satisfied you'll be as a content creator, and I think long term you'll build the type of audience that you want to build.
That amazing advice, not just to content creators, but anybody with a message with belief that wants to have an impact anywhere. I think that was extremely profound. I want to be respectful of your time, but I also want to close out on a couple things because there's so much that you get a chance to be exposed to cover. I mean, we've talked about the samurai case and de minimis exemptions and circular economies. What do you feel like isn't getting enough attention that you wish people would give a little bit more bandwidth to, or what are you looking for changes the most in? Like, where do you want to see movement in policy, or where people are placing their attention and trying to enact change?
Yeah. One thing, it's not a perfect answer to your question, but it's something that came to mind as you asked it. I saw Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche post something the other day that there will be no new prosecutions regarding the Epstein case. I emailed the Department of Justice. So Deputy Attorney General Blanche issued a memo in April of last year saying we're not going after open source devs, crypto mixers. We're going after the end users, the people who abuse this technology. So I was like, oh, fantastic. Like, so you'll weigh in on the Samurai case, and this case will just be taken off the docket in the Southern District. I emailed him almost some days, multiple days in a row, but like every other day for like 2 months. And I say him, meaning like the press line for the Department of Justice, saying like, hey, I'm the White House correspondent for Bitcoin Magazine. I'm also covering the Samurai case. So could we have a conversation? I'm happy to come there, do like a video interview or just interview for a written piece. And I didn't get one response. So when I see stuff like Todd Blanche saying, we're not prosecuting anyone in the Epstein case, meanwhile, you published a memo saying you're not going after people like William Lonergan Hill and Keon Rodriguez, the Samurai devs, and then you allowed this to all transpire the way that it did, it's kind of mind boggling to me. I think in the end of the day, I think he's only doing more damage to people's trust in the system. Unfortunately, there's sort of casualties like Keon Rodriguez and Liam Lonergan Hill that are sitting in prison right now when realistically they shouldn't be. Um, so I think that's it. But there's one other thing about that case that I will bring to people's attention, and I've gotten some people who have not necessarily agreed with me when I say this, but I believe it in my heart, so I will repeat it. If you're developing privacy tech and this kind of stuff, it don't go out there and run your mouth about criminals using it and stuff like that. I don't, to be honest, I don't even really think, even if it's just like trolling or shit posting, I don't think either of these guys really meant it. And that's the sort of the makes this whole situation even worse. But honestly, it doesn't help things because I think it was Gavin Newsom that posted something after Senator Lutz from Decrypt went to the White House and he asked when he asked Trump, "Are you going to pardon Keon Rodriguez, this developer?" This was like a video that went viral on Twitter in December of last year, and was when Trump was like, "Well, I don't know. Do you think I should pardon him?" Blah blah blah. And I was just like, "Man, I wish I was the person." Now I regret not being in the White House. I should have been the journalist to ask that question. When this happened, Gavin Newsom posted something saying like, like look at the sorts of people that Trump is pardoning, and it doesn't help with the samurai rhetoric being like Russian oligarchs use this or criminals use this. And I think if William Hill and Keon came out of prison, I don't think they'd be posting like that anymore. I think everybody has sort of learned their lesson. But this speaks again to what I'm saying. Like if you're developing privacy tech, speak to the people in the world who need that. And not only that, speak to those in power who would want the same level of privacy if they were using this technology. If we're going to move into a world where we're transacting via Bitcoin and maybe other public blockchains for stable coins for the time being, I don't think that lasts long, but that's a whole different story. The people want privacy. When I pay for a coffee, I don't want people to see my bank, the bank account balance that payment came from. And that's the equivalent of what you're dealing with when you're spending in Bitcoin or on another public blockchain. People can see your balance, where that money came from. So speaking to these issues, because oftentimes when we speak about privacy, the average quote unquote normie is going to say, what are you hiding? What do you need to be private about? It's like, well, why do you close your shades, or like, why do you close the bathroom door when you're using the bathroom? It's like we all have privacy for on multiple levels of our life for various reasons. Financial privacy just isn't something that we think about a lot, partially because we've always had it with cash. And now we're only living in a world for 2 decades where like the PayPals of the worlds have existed. So this is a relatively new thing for our brains to wrap themselves around. And so I think that my main sort of focus, I think, when it comes to privacy tech, not only Samurai and Tornado Cash, what we saw with that, but like we're going to see privacy tech like eCash, what's happening with Cashew, what's happening with Fedi. Privacy is going to become a thing as we move forward. If we don't fight for these things, especially as not being bombastic about the way we fight for it, just simply describing privacy as a human right, something that we should all had, something that we've had with cash forever, since before digital anything, forever. The world didn't, we made it this far as a species with privacy. Like we can continue making it far with privacy. Things will ideally get better. So it's again approaching these issues and framing them through the right lens. With the samurai stuff, like maybe it was part of their marketing or they were just trying to get attention. Having spoken with Keon more in depth than Bill, I think the lesson has sort of been learned. Unfortunately, they were the sacrificial lamb. I have been in touch with the White House even after leaving my post to let them know, like, look, this is truly an issue, and please pay attention to it. And ideally, we do see a pardon. But we also need to get to a place where it's not just people like me or people signing a petition begging the Trump to pardon these developers. We need laws that protect these developers. Ideally, market structure ends up doing that, the Clarity Act, because people have a right to privacy in the digital age. We're not used to that. It has not been the norm thus far in the digital age, but it's something that we do need to fight for. And again, we need to do that mindfully. We need to do that by saying that I'm just an everyday person who values my privacy, that we all have a right to privacy, that even government officials want privacy, and that we should stand our ground with that, which is part of the reason I covered the Samurai and Tornado Cash cases as closely as I did. Also, knowing that there are people from the White House that follow my social media accounts, saying, like, look, I'm the same guy who's there, that's sort of, respectful and kind to all of you. This is something that we really care about. I'm a normal guy dressed in collared shirts, and like I'm not out here saying burn it all down sort of thing. But I do really believe that there are some fundamental things that some rights that we need to preserve. And it was actually, I'll close it on this note. Like, I remember having Jeff I was doing a podcast through Bitcoin Magazine called Bitcoin Politics. And I know Jeff advises some politicians, some much higher level politicians like Pierre Poilievre, who was running for Prime Minister of Canada. He's met with Bukele. And I said, like, what's the secret, Jeff? Like, how do you talk to these politicians and have them get it? Because like Jeff connected me with Ken Sim, who's the mayor of Vancouver. And when I spoke with him, I'm like, well, this guy like really gets Bitcoin. And he said Jeff was the person who taught him. And Jeff said something that just made me feel terrible about myself. Not that that was his intention, but he was like, oh, you just speak to them authentically. I'm like, what does that say about me that I had to go and ask that question? But it was funny, but I think that that's part of it, right? It isn't trying to find some sly roundabout way to like work privacy in there. It's simply saying, no, 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 this is important for everybody. We all are entitled to this thing, and people should get that and advocate for it on all sorts of levels, whether it's something more local, whether it's posting about it, whether it's approaching a politician about it. Privacy should not be a taboo subject. I think the Overton window on this issue is shifting to something where we can talk about it a little bit more without seeming like we're outing ourselves as some sort of criminal or something like that. So, in terms of policy and what people should focus on, I think that that's definitely really, really important. And, in doing so for ourselves, we're also advocating for the Anti-Corruption Foundation, Navalny's foundation, who takes donations that sometimes go through mixers where the donor needs to protect himself. Otherwise, literally, the Anti-Corruption Foundation it's a terrorist organization in the eyes of Vladimir Putin, and you go to jail if you donate to it. So, in protecting ourselves and our own right to privacy, we're also helping the people who are doing the hardest work out there, running against the Vladimir Putins of the world, the activists who are receiving and making donations and transferring money to people who need it, who have been debanked and who have been, you know, cast aside or villainized by the powers that be in their country. So the privacy fight is going to be the next big fight. We're in the middle of it, I think, right now. And we should all speak authentically about why it's important, ideally to make the situation better for all of us.
Last question before we sign off. We're in a funky time right now in the market. We've had a huge drawdown. People coming into the space are like, what is this? I was told it's going up forever. You've been through a couple cycles now. For people that are just now entering or even who've been around for a while, what's your advice to navigate it, to keep your head on straight, just as a parting thought for people who are here now?
Yeah. It hurts. It's not fun. We live in a predominantly fiat denominated world. So watching the amount your purchasing power in fiat terms go down because you bought some Bitcoin at 110,000 and now it's at whatever it is today, 76,000 or something. It's not fun. I entered directly into pain when I got into Bitcoin. I bought some Bitcoin in like January 2018, probably between like 12 and 13,000, and it went down to 3. So that's like a 75% drawdown. I would say that I'm happy with myself. I think I only put maybe $1,000 in at that time. And I'm not downplaying anyone who only has $1,000 of disposable income. That was actually a lot for me at the time. I didn't have a ton of disposable income. So I'm not saying it didn't hurt. But what happened was I didn't sort of throw $1,000 in thinking, yeah, this will be great if it works, and if whatever, I'll give up on it. I was committed to it. I was committed to not only I wasn't just sort of interested in it, but I continued to pursue that interest diligently by reading and learning about it. Maybe you're someone listening to this podcast who's just learning about it. This is, get ready to do a lot more of this for the next however long the bear market lasts, because some of it's going to play a huge role in you helping to build your conviction in this asset. At the same time, you shouldn't be taking my word for it. You shouldn't be taking Beau's word for it. You should be building your own conviction, diving in and investigating the technology, investigating the economic theory behind it, and coming up with your own conviction. The one thing I will say, you don't like, I love Jack Mahler's. Just did a fireside chat with him in Amsterdam last year. He's great. But with someone like that who talks about being all in on Bitcoin and everything else, that's fine. And Jack's allowed to be all in on Bitcoin. It doesn't mean you need to be all in on Bitcoin right now yourself. Take steps towards it. Not forget about even like taking your disposable income. Go sign up for Fold app. I don't get paid by Fold app. Don't get me wrong. Or get like a crypto rewards credit card, like the Gemini card. Make sure it's Bitcoin. Don't get rewards and whatever else. But like, just okay. I went and bought some food today. I got 3% back in Bitcoin on it. You're going to worry far less about that Bitcoin going up and down in price versus if you took your hard-earned dollars, bought some, and then watched it lose 30% of its dollar denominated purchasing power. So if you're new to this space right now, if you're hurting, if you need, I know people say this, it's like satanic of me to say, if you put too much money in and you're worried about paying your bills, take some of that money out and make sure you could pay your bills. Do not let this become something that makes you lose sleep. Do not let this make something that ruins your relationships. Get to a point with it where you feel comfortable, but you have to continue learning. There'll be ups and downs, and the downs hurt. Majority of the time in Bitcoin is pain when it comes to fiat denominated, Bitcoin price. The upsides are great, and we all celebrate together, and everybody posts, and everybody's friends again on Twitter and all that stuff. The downsides hurt, but they're what make you develop conviction in the asset class. And I say what make you do it because the people who don't develop that conviction panic sell it, they hate it, it's a scam, and then they probably get convinced to buy back in at the next top or get FOMO back in at the next top. You have to do the work. There's nobody else that can convince you that this is the right thing for you to do with your money. You need to come up with your own level of feeling like this is something I want to be a part of, and more than developing conviction, something you want to contribute to, something you want to do to make sure this thing works. You want to defend the network, you want to support it, you want to contribute to it. I think developing that is sort of incredibly important as well. So keep those things in mind. We might be, if history repeats, 2026 might not be a fun year as far as Bitcoin's price. But if you decide to double down in terms of studying Bitcoin, 2027 will be a blast. If you study it, maybe dollar cost average a little bit, not financial advice, earn some Bitcoin passively, credit card rewards, whatever. Those things are more popular now than ever. They were not a thing when I got into it in 2018. You're going to be setting yourself up for, it's like getting your summer body ready in the winter, right? You're doing all the exercise in the winter so that when you're on the beach in the summer, you're looking good. Similar, do it in the bear market so that once the bull market rolls around, you're feeling good. And I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic advice. Frank, I really appreciate you sharing your time with me, with the audience. It's been super fun getting to know you. Can't wait to see what you're up to next and how your path continues to unfold. And just such a privilege to know you at all and really appreciate you coming on.
Likewise, my friend. Thank you for having me. I try to say this at the end of each pod. I started out as a pleb here writing a Substack that a few, maybe tens of people subscribe to. So I'm always grateful to these opportunities to speak to a broader audience. So sincerely appreciate you even considering me to come on, much less having me on here and hosting me. Really appreciate it, Beau.
It's been super fun. For people who are not currently following you, where can they keep up with what you're working on and stay in touch?
Yeah, you can get me on Twitter at Frank Corva, no underscores or fanciness or anything. Please find me on Noster. I think if you type in my name via Primal or Damus, one of the Noster clients, it'll come up. LinkedIn. If you want to subscribe to a newsletter, I write it for free. It's the same newsletter I started 5 years ago. It's just Substack. My name, frankcorva.substack.com. Also, if you are new to Bitcoin, I've been writing for the last few weeks. We're probably in a bear market and kind of explaining to people the psychology of dealing with a bear market, just how garbage it can feel and all that kind of stuff. So if you feel like you need a little bit of that comfort, I do that each week in my Substack. So feel free to subscribe there. And yeah, I think those are probably the best platforms to get me on.
Awesome. Make sure you keep up with Frank. And Frank, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Have a wonderful day. And until next time.
Take it easy, everybody. Thanks again.